Podcast, the Yellow Tape Cop podcast. We got some exciting things in store for you, especially Dave, but also some of the guests we have lined up. So my name is Kevin, and this is Dave.
Dave, Kev, that was the best intro you could throw together in 3 seconds, dude. I really appreciate it. We're off to a smashing start.
Well, me and Dave have been talking about these cases for a couple of months. And the great thing about these episodes that you're going to find is they're going to be like our conversations in that every time you talk to Dave, there'll be different things that will come out that were not in his book, which we'll talk about. He has a very well-received book called Monster that is about pedophile monsters or child predator monsters that were mostly operating in New England, but in the Northeast and also some other areas in the 70s, 80s, a little bit in the 90s. And we're going to try to connect these to more modern cases and what lessons we can take from it. And Dave also has another book coming out very soon about Roy DeMeo connecting to this industry, the child porn industry. Is that accurate, Dave? Or what's the best way to...
I'm hoping for an August release date. Don't hold me to it. I think I said that last year, the year prior about Monster, and it ended up getting delayed all the way until just after Thanksgiving. So one thing I do not know much about, to be honest with you, is the publishing industry. And I continually learn that every day, that I just always assume do good work. People will accept it and they'll do what they can to throw it together. The first draft or the first and a half draft is in. I'm expecting, 10 pages of Post-it notes, coming my way soon. But the book delves more into something that I touched on in Monster, which was, I did a little more than touch on it. I think I waded into the water, ankle deep anyway, in the organized crime connection to, the child pornographers who existed in the 1970s, late 1960s, all the way through the 1970s in the New England area and so on. Well, really all the way up the whole Northeast coast into Toronto and Quebec and Canada. And a lot of my new book covers a lot of the Canadian connection to Wayne Chapman, the main protagonist in the book, and DeMeo. But I think people will find it interesting. Probably be no surprise to anyone that, the early child pornography business was really a mob creation. So, I'm really excited for people to see that and see how it's received.
Forgive me while I put on my glasses. These spotlights make me start blinking after a while. So that's
getting serious now. So
yeah, when I did a show on my other channel, Yellow Cottage Tales, I did a couple of shows a few weeks ago where I was in the kitchen and it was well lit for natural light, so I didn't need these spotlights. And everybody was like, "Dude, put the glasses back on."
The glasses have become like Michael Jackson's glove, Elvis's hips gyrating. The glasses have become sort of a staple, Kev. So we got to keep them.
So one of the things that I think that might also delay your book is that the evidence just seems to be a continuous stream. That new evidence comes in for Dave all the time. And we think once the book is out and once people start following this podcast, even more will come out. But there's going to be things that he wants to get into this book before it goes into the final, publication.
Yeah, I think that, that's true. It's one of those stories, like, you peel the layer of the onion and, you think you're at the end and, you're never anywhere close to the end. It's like a bottomless pit of, names and places, and getting them all straightened out in your mind.
Yes.
It's not easy, especially since I don't have like a team of researchers or anything like that. I do everything on my own. Every bit of my investigation into the criminal syndicate, has been done by me, self-paid. All my trips I paid for myself, all the dingy, horrible hotel rooms, every trip to the adult theater or the bathhouse, I paid for them all. Funny story. I just think of that and I think about something probably sometime in 2018. My wife looked at my credit card statement and she's like, "You spend a lot of time at bathhouses, don't you?" And and I said, "Yeah, matter of fact, I do." And And the reason why I did that is because I had gotten a tip from someone, and this is such a weird side story, and I apologize, but it'll make sense someday to you all, that a lot of these older predators like to convene in adult bookstores, peep shows, and there's a lot of them in Providence. Providence is like the hub for adult bookstores. I live here in Providence. It's the skyline right behind me here. There's 5 adult strip clubs, within a 2-mile radius. There's a bunch of peep shows. Anything you'd want to get into in the adult realm is around here. So I got a tip from someone that a lot of older predators like to hang out in a bathhouse called the Megaplex here in Providence. And, at that time, my reporting really was just word of mouth. I was just...
Wait, time out for 1 second. There are still peep shows? That still exists in the day of the internet?
There are still peep shows, live peep shows with a live woman or man on the other end every night, happening right now.
Yep. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue. I didn't mean that. That
and
blows
Kevin,
my mind.
If that's an interest of yours, you can message me offline. I'll get you an ad. Okay? No judgment here. So anyway, I figured it would be, at that point I was channeling my inner, who's the guy who did Fear and Loathing? What's his name?
Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. What's that?
I was Hunter S. Thompson.
The writer. I thought you meant the actor. I love that. Nicolas Cage, right?
Yeah. So Hunter S. Thompson, a guy I grew up on, did a lot of gonzo reporting, right? If there was, he would just go there. And that's what, like, that spirit is really what pushed Monster through for me, is like, all right, then now I'm a gay bathhouse customer. You know what I mean? And I'm going to get to know some of these older guys. And so, I started doing that a lot. And, I got some great information, some great, some not so great, some useless. And but what I had learned is that a lot of these men who were in their 60s, 70s, 50s had been in that scene for decades. So they could provide a lot of insight for me as to what it was like in the 1970s, years before I was born. And my wife had saw the credit card statement, and she said, "Wow, you're really getting into character here, aren't you?" Yeah.
Like Donnie Brasco.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, and I did feel like that sometimes, in the writing of the book, there were a lot of down swings, a lot of bad days. It's just not interesting. It's not great subject matter, right, to delve into. It's the worst kind of subject matter for me, in fact, as a father of 2 boys. It's so I need, moments like that offered some light reprieve for me.
Actually, you're talking about that immersive aspect to this is really a good way for me to kind of jump off here and just quickly introduce why I got into this, because it really has to do with a lot of what you just said there. Not that I did it, but seeing your story doing it. So for me, I probably shouldn't say this on this channel, which is the Yellow Tape Podcast. It's about true crime. I'm not into true crime. I never have been. I never was before I started my channel. And even to this day, I don't really watch anything on it. Even whether it's a fictionalized version, Jeffrey Dahmer, or the real stuff. I watch science videos, history. I find true crime kind of makes me a little bit in a bad mood. You know what I'm saying? Like the other day, I told you I stumbled across a case that you knew well in Brockton. I'm not going to go into it here, but I work hard 12 hours a day. And it was 9:00 in the morning. And I did something I had never done before. I said, I got to stop and watch Seinfeld. I need to laugh, But so what started me down this path was in some ways the same as you, although you have a more complicated tale. When I had COVID a year and a half ago, bad case, 104 temperature. And I went looking for a documentary thinking, I'm going to do this tonight. And I stumbled across Melanie Perkins' documentary, Have You Seen Andy? Which is about we're going to be talking a lot about this. It's covered a lot in Dave's book too. It's about the disappearance of Andy Puglisi, a 10-year-old boy in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Now, I also grew up in Lawrence, just as Melanie did, and I was only 9, so I was the same age as Melanie. So the story, I recognized it right away what it was, and I said, I have to watch this. And so after that night, I lay in bed, feverish, and I worked out the entirety of a feature-length screenplay in my head. I'd never done that before. Haven't done it since. Just going it over it in my head. And maybe someday we'll talk about that, because I actually did I'm getting a couple of bites on it. We'll see what happens. But I ended up writing. Then I said the next day, I was like, you know what? Once my fever broke, I'm like, I'm not going to write this damn thing. Who wants to see a screenplay about a child predator? No one's going to pay for that. It's the worst thing ever. But I felt compelled to write it. So I wrote it in record time for me. I wrote it in like a month. The whole thing was done. And then never opened it again. But I did, for my YouTube channel, I started researching more deeply into the Andy Puglisi story. Didn't know about Dave's book at that time. So I found what I could online, took a lot from Melanie Perkins, from her documentary and her website, and had a guy, Tom, a professional narrator, do it for me. And when I was done, I said, that's it. I am never doing a child case predator again. I don't want anything to do with this stuff, you know? Then I wasn't narrating at the time myself too. But then that summer I narrated a multi-part episode on Lizzie Borden. I did it myself because for some reason, when I started just talking about it, because I knew the case so well, for the first time, I started picking up subscribers, and people said, you know, this guy really knows the case, at least, you know? So from then I started narrating my own, and somebody said, why don't you do something on the Delphi murders in Delphi? And I just remembered it as the Snapchat murders, those poor kids on the bridge. Libby had taken some video of her presumed killer on that bridge. So I started doing that case, and I started really building subscribers and getting a lot of positive remarks. People really liked my analysis of it. And I still was like kind of thinking, I don't think I want to do these again. But then not too long ago, Dave got in touch with me, and I read his book, and I was blown away. And I was like, you know, there really is a purpose here to doing these cases, because the more I look into true crime, I see I'm totally pro police, but I think they have a blind spot on these kind of predators. I don't think they do a good job with them. And so I don't feel there's a lot of people out there doing the work that Dave is doing, and Melanie to a large extent too. But Dave really, so to me, I was like, this is a huge story that I want to report on, do whatever I can to help Dave on it. But the other aspect of the story, this goes back to what you were just saying, that fascinated me, was the personal aspect. You could see from Dave's book how much he immersed himself into this, you know, walking in the paths multiple times where these crimes happen, talking to victims' families, talking to the police. Just, you know, he talks about going a week unshaven and just barely eating and just completely, I don't know how he does it. I wouldn't be able to do it. So maybe he can tell you more about his personal reason, or if he wants to go into it, how he got started on this and what it's like to go through that.
Yeah, that's great, man. I mean, we have the very similar stories in a lot of senses. I was the same. It was probably September of 2013. My wife was very, very pregnant with our son, who was born in November that year. I was home sick. Saw the documentary, Have You Seen Andy, by Melanie Perkins on HBO Max or some streaming service of the time, maybe on demand. And, you know, same, I was blown away by a story that, well, at first I should say I absolutely love true crime. I grew up reading crime books my entire life. Library was my refuge. I had an aunt who had taken a great interest in me, who was an English teacher. And she said, I read 2 books a week, and that needs to be your benchmark. And still to this day, now I'm down to like 1 on a good week. I'll get into, I just finished one this week, and it's Saturday, so that's not looking good. But I've read hundreds and hundreds of true crime books over the years, maybe even thousands, I'd venture to say. So I've always been obsessed with crime. I work in law enforcement. Always been obsessed with the criminal mind. And, you know, of course, I was a victim of childhood sexual abuse. So it's always been a crusade of mine growing up, you know, getting in trouble. You know, I was a punk kid. I had a lot of issues with relationships. Had a lot of issues in my early 20s, you know, I had a marriage that fell apart, which was completely my fault. Early on, I had, you know, very difficult relations with people. in general, I was just a terrible person to be around on every level. It wasn't until I turned 30, met my wife, had 2 kids, that I seemed to like start to understand how I need to behave in the outside world. Because when you're in that much pain all the time, you're very reckless. It takes away all of your inhibitions. You're mad at the world. Then you start having, God forbid you have addiction issues like I had, especially with alcohol. Then it really goes away. You're just a 24/7 basket case, and that's really how I lived for the first, 30 years of my life. So, always knew I wanted to write. That was always my passion. I worked, at a bunch of different websites over the years. I've done everything from cover sports to write about political events. Had a cup of coffee at ESPN. I wrote for probably every big publication that covers combat sports. I love boxing. I love mixed martial arts. Garnered a very big name and good following covering that. But when I saw the documentary, my path was set. I never thought I'd write a book or anything or ever talk about it, but I knew that I needed to help in any way I could in this quest to find out what happened to this little boy, Andy Puglisi, in Lawrence, and also, David Lewison, a 5-year-old boy in Brockton, Kurt Chapman, Andrew Amato, Lee Savoy, and Amanda Gallen out in Wyoming, and all these missing children that, we have in this part of the state, or excuse me, this part of the country, this little northeast corner here. And because I am that little kid, right? I was that little kid who, the last thing that he saw was a man who, you trusted, betraying that trust and doing something to them that was going to affect them for the rest of their life. So, I immersed myself in it. I the next morning after seeing the documentary, I was on my laptop. And at the time, there was scant information really outside of Mel's documentary about what exactly had happened, and that was appealing to me. I don't like to do cases that have been beat over the head a million times. I won't, you'll never see me do anything on Charles Manson or someone like that.
Or something that's been solved. You like the unsolved cases.
Sure. Even,
right. The same way.
Even some cases that are solved are incredibly interesting if it's got the right elements, I guess, to me anyway.
If there's a lesson to be learned that you can apply to the unsolved cases. And
sure. Even that's great. That's a great point. And, it sort of just snowballed. It came from, I remember, spending the entire day just finding everything I could, printing it out, putting it in a folder, making some phone calls. And then it was like, it became a thing where it was like, okay, now I need to travel. I need to take a notebook with me. I need to ask questions. I need to get to Providence, which at the time I was living right on the South Coast. So it was easy for me to get to Providence. Then it was like, okay, I need to get to Florida and chase things down there. And then I need to get to Montana. Once I started making the connections, I need to get to Bridgewater, and then it just became a thing where I needed to get to every place and stay there for a good amount of time. And to the detriment of myself, like I said, I wrote in the book, there were times where I was just really, I was just like, not even a human being. I was like so driven by, like, I wasn't even a person. it was just the mission. That's all that mattered, and my wife would pull me aside a lot of times and say, you're really making me scared for you. I don't know what's going on with you. You're not here half the time. You're telling me you go to work. You don't go to work. You're doing research. You're staying in places you shouldn't be staying. You're talking to people you shouldn't be talking to. And, what's the end game? She's like, I'm all about helping kids and helping you, but what's coming of this, and I just, still to this moment, I'm not sure I really have a good answer for it. I think things have really kind of evened out, but, I don't think I feel it's necessary to do things like that anymore, but, chasing down this story has been, my adult life's so far, at least in my 30s, my work, and here we are all these years later, and I'm not sure it's any more clear, Kev, than it's ever been,
Well, one of the things, from talking to Dave, is that during the course of this series, just like I've experienced during the course of my conversations with him, there's going to be a lot more personal stuff that Dave reveals to us and reveals to the audience that is incredibly powerful and compelling. I'm not even sure if he knows when it's going to come out, because it just kind of comes out naturally in the conversation. I do want to say that, and he'll get mad at me and probably hit the delete here, but Dave also is a combat veteran who fought in Afghanistan and faced some serious hardship there. So to me, he's a hero. All these guys that fought for their country are heroes, but also even more of a hero knowing now what he's gone through in his life to get to this point, to make himself what he is, a family man who's basically in his own free time trying to help save other kids by chasing down these monsters. Now, one question I would have, I don't know if you can remember this, but so when you got started, so after you watched that documentary and you made a decision, I'm going to start doing this research on my own. I don't know if you started with the Andy case or with Wayne Chapman, or, and I'm sure initially you're doing this research at home. But what was the first time you remember when you finally were out on the road, on the trail, and you really went through one of those personal moments where it just really hit you and you just weren't even sure how to react to it, but just being in, can you remember what one of those times? Or,
well, you mean where I was starting to question my own sanity or the cases, or
that too, but just the impact. See, it's there's that line, like for me, I can do these cases if they're unsolved and I'm going through the intellectual part of it, of trying to gain insights into a case. But if I slip a little bit closer and start experiencing it through the minds of the victim, that's when I need to go to Seinfeld. I'm like, whoa. And that's what I almost quit today. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't think, I rather go back to writing fiction. It's more fun that the heroes can live at the end,
Right.
The kid always lives.
Right.
So, but you were out there once you made that commitment and you're on the trail, and like Bar Jonah's victim in Great Falls, Montana, you went down that alleyway. I forget the child's name, but you went down that alleyway multiple times. But when was the first one that it really, I know it's because of your personal experience in your childhood, it's always been right there as a real thing to you and not just some true crime research. But when did it really become almost like a crisis where you're like, wow, I can't, how am I going to get through this?
On a beautiful day in sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And the reason why I was in Fort Lauderdale is because I was chasing down a man named Arthur Claridge, who was people with motorcycles. I apologize. Ridiculous. Does it need to be that loud?
The sound of summer.
Yep. Yeah, right. And even though it's 50 degrees. Anyway, I was chasing down a guy named Arthur Claridge, and he's somebody that I'm sure we'll devote an episode to, who should have many, many things devoted to him. This was a man who was a Harvard graduate, born in the 1940s from Massachusetts, who was a well-respected man in his community. And his name turned up in the case files for the Revere sex ring that operated in 1977, which we'll get into much more as the podcast progresses. But
a shocking story. I mean, really.
Yep. Yeah, Arthur was the headmaster of a school in Newton, which operates to this day, called the Fessenden School, which was a private boarding school for young boys. And I had talked to, I believe the number was 63 total victims of Arthur's while he was the headmaster. And this was a man who raped young boys at a pace that Wayne Chapman would be envious of. Drugs, alcohol,
those positions of trust. That's what's,
Yep.
That's what's so offensive. I mean, that's what's so frightening about it,
And Claridge actually had turned around in 77 and basically flipped on everybody else involved in the ring. And he got off basically scot-free. He had a probation term. And, I wanted to track Claridge down because, he was one of the few people who was still alive. When you're talking about old cases, you're obviously going to start with the people who are still living. And, I just thought that he could really add some insight and maybe talk to me. So I tracked him down to, I believe the address was 3430 Galt Island Road. I could be wrong. Gault, but it's very similar to that. and it was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He lived in a high-rise apartment building. He lived on 8F. F is in Foxtrot, if I remember correctly. 8F. And, here I am on the road and looking terrible, I'm sure, unshaved, probably hadn't changed clothes in a week. And I went up and went to the door, no answer. And a woman, a nurse, a visiting angel type person, finally stopped me, and she said, "Yeah, what's going on?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm looking for a guy named Arthur Claridge." And
How old was he at this point?
he died at 95 years old, and I believe this was a year before he died. He was
okay,
and he was in rough shape at this time.
Yeah.
He required round the clock care.
Yeah.
Could never answer my questions. I mean, he was totally gone, right? And the woman said to me, "Oh, he's a very old man. He's very sick." And I said, "There's a lot of people in Massachusetts who would like some questions answered, myself included. And I'd like to speak with them." And again, this woman being totally rational, not mean,
Doing her job. Yeah.
doing her job. She had no idea what the it was like two different people. He left in the late 70s, moved to Fort Lauderdale, and God knows what kind of life he lived. No one knew who he was. This was pre-internet, pre-cell phones. You couldn't have known. But I knew. And I just wasn't taking no for an answer that day, to the point where the sheriff's department had to come out and the deputies had to talk to me. And at that moment, I was kind of...
So you did get in to talk to him, though? She let you in to talk?
No, definitely not.
Okay. All right.
She feared for... She didn't know who the hell I was. She feared for his safety.
Yeah.
She feared for his safety. So she got the police involved. And yes, buddy. Sorry, Kev. Yeah. Okay, go watch YouTube, but I'm talking.
You were visiting Arthur Claridge?
So, yep.
He wouldn't let you in, yeah.
Deputies come out and, she must have made a phone call and said, "Hey, I got this crazy looking guy here looking for a 95-year-old man claiming he's a pedophile." And in my mind at that time, my totally fucking fractured psyche, I'm screaming at the deputy saying, "I'm the good guy."
And they probably thought you wanted revenge, like you were one of his past victims or something,
They didn't even care to listen to my side of the story, and then finally I did get a deputy who I was like, "Listen, you don't understand. I'm a researcher. Google this guy's name," and I think there was one point I remember where I was like, "You know what, I'm starting to hit rock bottom here. I'm going to get arrested."
Yeah.
I got to hit pause and maybe go home to the wife and take a shower and reevaluate. I think I actually shelved the book after that for a little bit.
Yeah.
I remember I remember one of the deputies saying to me, "Look at yourself. I mean, you're out here. It's September. It's 95 degrees. Look at the beach right across the street. Look at everybody partying, having fun. And you're dressed in pants and boots." And he's like, "It makes me worry about you, where your head's at, man."
Yeah.
And, it was a decent reality check, for myself at the time. I would say that was one of the first times outside of Montana. Montana was a whole nother.
Yeah.
Montana was dark because, Barjona was just such an evil guy and waiting.
To me, he's the worst of the monsters.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100%. There are certainly worse pedophiles in this story. Guys like Claridge have Barjona beat by miles, but Barjona seemingly, his whole thing was he got off on your fear, your misery, and that to me is about as dark as it gets, and I agree. Barjona, my research into him, I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, well, you're the expert on Chapman," and I would say I'm almost more of an expert on Barjona, not tooting my own horn. I don't think that's anything that anybody should ever hang their hat on, but
and there's Charles Pierce too. He's another one of the ones that's just, and I don't think history, I don't know, Melanie had told me history really wouldn't know anything about him if she hadn't uncovered him. He was even kind of forgotten about the Lawrence police.
Yeah, that's absolutely 100% true. Melanie has been the champion of finding Charlie Pierce, and if it were not for her steadfast, belief in her steadfast, promised to herself to find out what exactly happened to her friend Andy way back in '76. The world wouldn't know about Charlie Pierce. He would have just been your neighborhood creep who died in prison, and nobody would care. But there's a lot about Charlie Pierce that's yet to come, and I've toyed with the notion of just doing a Pierce book on its own. I think there's enough there.
I mean, you're talking about a guy that traveled around as a carny worker,
yeah,
and doing, whatever. I mean, that's just like something out of a Stephen King horror story,
straight out of American Horror Story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just again, a pitiful creep, but not as famous, obviously, as Barjona, not as near the media coverage. I mean, the only people who are ever going to talk about Charlie Pierce are the two people in this conversation and Melanie, so
yeah.
But maybe, in a lot of ways that's a great thing. And in a lot of ways, I think that's a tragic thing. More people should, because this is a guy who hurt kids, and there's communities that were shattered over it, and one specifically in Chicago, which I hope we can get to in a later episode. Yeah.
There were a few things that really I've focused on as far as this particular project. But one of the things that has made me kind of commit to really making it my focus now, because I stopped in the middle of writing a novel that my partner in Florida was going to turn into a screenplay, and I still want to finish it because we know it's incredibly marketable. But when I looked at this, and it seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, that other than you and Melanie, there's no one else out there doing this work or looking into this stuff. Am I wrong, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Melanie is the matriarch of the family, if we can put it that way. She's the one who inspired me. Without the documentary and her work, we would not be here right now. The universe works weird that way. She's the queen of it all. And
but is there anybody else out there even looking into this? Someone writing books, someone doing investigations? I mean, retired cops, anybody?
All the biggest names in true crime podcasts, guys like Dan Zupansky. If you look at the podcast rankings, you'll find guys like Dan Zupansky and True Crime Garage, Nick Edwards, they've all reached out to me in private to ask me questions about Chapman.
Right. But they're not doing research though, like you are. They're just,
They basically were looking for orientations. They were looking for me to give them, an orientation on what all went down and who Wayne Chapman is, and, crimes that they're interested in that Chapman may have had some, or, men of his ilk might have had something to do with. So, and I use them as examples because those are sort of the biggest names in our space right now. And they had no idea about anything that happened. And a lot of people do know, have you seen Andy, but they know it's sort of in a baseline level way. A young boy went missing from a pool.
Right. They know this.
That's terrible. He's missing, children go missing all the time.
Yeah.
But who knew that we had this massive sort of criminal syndicate? I call it the machine in the book, and it really was a machine. And that's what ate him up,
That's the other big part of it. So when I first talked to Melanie last year, when I was researching the Andy case, she told me, now obviously she's been doing this research, just her focus is just on Andy, but she's been doing it for 25, 30 years. And she also lived it since she was there when it happened. She's spoken to, countless state police and local police involved with this stuff. So I respect her opinion. And when she told me that her belief was that there were accomplices involved in this crime, that it might be connected to the production of CSAM, child porn, basically, that it might involve powerful institutions that were helping cover it up. I don't want to say I rejected that, but I leaned very strongly against it. It just seemed to me that these guys were almost always just lone predators, weirdos that are out there following their obsessions. But then when I read Dave's book, that really moved the needle for me. And now since I've known him, and the more I talk to him, it continues to just move and move and move. It's not conclusive for me yet. So I consider this to be a project that is, despite all the work, he's sitting on a mountain of evidence. There's a bigger mountain even in his head from all the people he's talked to. It's still early on in the investigation because it's still waiting for some of those big breaks. And I look at this kind of like from the movie Spotlight, which is about the Boston Globe Spotlight team. And those guys were kind of on their own breaking the Catholic priest scandal. But they had the resources of the Boston Globe behind them. And here you have Dave and Melanie working not even together, but out on their own doing this stuff. And I was like, damn, you need to somehow get them the resources so we can break this open, because there are still victims out there that are ongoing. And there's a lot to learn from this case that can be applied. I want to actually ask you this too. One of the things that I was thinking more recently was that, we think of these crimes were pre-internet. So I think a lot of people out there listening will say, that's really interesting, but that stuff doesn't go on now because it's all online. It's all digital, right? But as I started thinking about this over the last couple of weeks, I realized these people aren't stupid. They know that everybody's getting caught on. You're not going to leave anything with a digital footprint. You're not going to put anything on the internet, I don't think, anymore. That's my theory. You could tell me I'd like to know what you think about that. But I'm wondering if these guys right now that are out there, and there's always going to be a percentage of the population that is into this. That's their thing. Whether they're born that way, some of them, it's a result of abuse. There's always going to be a percentage, 0.5% of the population or something. I think they've gone back to using the methods of the 70s, just like this, pre-internet, person in person. Does that make sense? Or?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence. I'll pick apart a couple things you said there. First of all, you started by saying that you didn't think that they worked together and there was accomplices. And now you're moved the needle a little more, the other way after reading my book and reading some of, seeing some of Mel's stuff again. And I think even in any setting, even in a prison setting, which I can speak to because I work with offenders every day, sometimes in a setting behind the walls. And I can always tell you who the sex offenders are because they're always together. They stick to each other because, one, they're ashamed of their worldview and they're ashamed of their crimes, and they need to seek other people out for validation, right? Nobody is a lone wolf. Everybody is looking for their tribe. I go to my son's baseball game and I see another dad there with a veteran hat on. I immediately go to him because that's my tribe. I'm a veteran, And if we were hanging out in a group together, Kevin, and you met a guy who was a former bar owner who's wearing cool shades, you probably go towards him, right? I mean, we're all like that. We're all human beings. So it's absolutely 100% the case that these predators find each other. They roam together, hunt together like dogs, So I don't even think that's really up for debate anymore. No, I'm not talking about the specific, Andy case. Sure, there's always should be debate there. That's healthy. But I think in general, we've learned over the years that predators get together, whether it be, in the real world, on the internet.
That they communicated with each other and befriended each other, yes. But that they worked together on crimes, that's a different leap.
We saw that in the 90s with Charles Janes, and the other guy's name escapes me.
The Curly kid.
The Jeffrey Curly killing.
Jeffrey Curly,
together. Salvatore Sicari was the other guy's name. His accomplice. Literal card carrying members of NAMBLA.
That's kind of the only case, though, that I know of that really were for sure that happened, right?
Well, I mean, we had Operation Playpen, which just happened a few years ago, where the FBI busted the largest CSAM website in the world, started by a man named Richard W. Chase, who lived in Naples, Florida. And he had a list of 300 men who worked alongside him to create and curate the CSAM activity that operated on a website that was password protected, encrypted on the Tor network. And they all worked together. 300 guys went down for that, a bunch from Massachusetts, as far as Italy, Germany, Hungary, Slovakia, all connecting in chat rooms on Kik in the internet to take down the biggest child porn bust in the history of the United States. So, and that was just a few years ago that happened. And in fact, the FBI agent who was involved in that, a man named Daniel Alfin, an agent named Daniel Alfin, was serving a massive child porn warrant in the city of Sunrise, Florida, just 2 years ago, and he was shot and killed.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
And
there was two of them, I think, killed, right?
Him. Yeah, there was also
FBI woman. Yeah,
female. Her name escapes me. It's a long name. Maybe we can get it in the show notes. But the reason why I bring those two up, is that there's that gal and that guy would have been chasing Wayne Chapman 40 years ago. You know what I mean? On the streets of Providence, clicking pictures of little boys in the shower or whatever. So Yeah, the digital age has brought in a new way of doing things, but there's still those images and videos, the hundreds of thousands of them. There's still a child and a victim on the other end of those, right? They're happening in real time. So.
No, but I think where I was trying to go was that if they're being forced to adopt because the FBI is so good at chasing them down online and using even AI to chase this down, look at images and stuff like that, then if they're being forced to adopt the methods of the 70s and the 80s, pre-internet, then studying some of those cases might actually still really give us a lot of insights into how to solve some what they're doing now.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, you're dead on. I mean, what they, and we don't always agree on everything, and I'm sure we'll disagree on other stuff, and that's great. It's healthy, but I couldn't agree more. I mean, these cases should be given a brush up for many levels. A, justice, of course. B, what happened, and C, how can we better protect the kids of today when men like Chapman and others have much more resources now to hurt children, right?
Right.
And we can jump on the internet and talk to anybody we want to in the matter of seconds. I mean, you're in Boston area and I'm in Providence. We're talking right now, right? I mean, it's really that easy. You jump on a gaming system, you're talking to a young kid, So, but if your question is, are they adopting sort of those old school strategies? I think that's open-ended. I think that's up for debate right now. I do look at the DOJ website weekly to see the CSAM indictments that are happening across the country and across the world. And they were big during COVID, of course, because kids were home. They were home with their abusers, men and sometimes women were home. I've met in my career, my real job, I've met a lot of women who were child sex crime, who had child sex crime charge. I just watched a woman the other day go away for 30 years on one count. So it's not like women don't do it. They do. They absolutely do it. But in our cases here, of course, we're talking about men. I think that's interesting because, it would probably be a little bit safer if we're thinking in the mind of a criminal to stay off the internet, right?
Right.
So
what do you think? I know it's probably difficult to come by this data, so you may have to just go by your opinion. What percentages of child abductions, excluding ones that are by a family member, so stranger on strangers that involve presumably sexual predators, what percentage of those do you think go unsolved?
Well, a lot of them, especially in Massachusetts in the 1970s, went unsolved. In fact, not only did they go unsolved, they frankly were never talked about again, almost like they never happened, and
right.
time. So I'd love to know the FBI statistics on it. I mean, I don't know offhand, but
you think maybe more than half, or?
Yeah, I would say definitely more than half. I'd probably say better than 70%. Do you have the answer? Is this a trick?
No, I don't, but it leads into what the question stems from what we were talking about. So, there may not be a lot of cases where we know for a fact that there were accomplices. However, since 70%, you're saying, of the cases are actually unsolved, and not only unsolved, but where there's really no clue what happened, then maybe we just don't know. I mean, if there were accomplices, we wouldn't know because most of them go unsolved, right? So, and I'm also been wondering too over the last several weeks that if you are working with accomplices, and you can speak a lot on this because you can talk about the specifics of how some of these guys operated, how reckless they might be. We've seen it with Ted Bundy, who was a different kind of criminal, but how reckless, really smart guy, but very reckless in his crime. So it's almost like they're in a different frame of mind when they're doing this stuff. But when they're working with accomplices, are they more likely to be a little more disciplined, so therefore more likely to get away with the crime?
Certainly. And the answer to your question is 63% of child abductions that they get murdered by the abductor go unsolved.
So you were very close.
There's your answer.
Yeah.
I'd say with accomplices, I think certainly in our cases, you usually have, it is my theory. Again, it is not, fact, and I'll expound more as time goes on and why I have these theories and sort of the receipts that I have to back me up. You usually have one offender who's, kind of a dope.
Yeah.
And you have one offender who's a really good criminal. And those two sort of come together, and the really good criminal, makes whatever need to happen. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think with adding in the accomplices, certainly helps. I don't think that some of the people we'll be talking about would have gotten away with any of their crimes had they not had more cunning connections to other criminals who could help them
Right.
sort of hide evidence, get rid of bodies,
Right.
lie to the police,
Right.
get their overall view of the police and how they should behave around them to change, which I think there was a sea change in some of our best known suspects here, where they, to a certain point, they couldn't help but talk to the police. And then at one point it just cold stopped and they never admitted anything again for the rest of their lives.
One of the things, I know one of the episodes we're going to do, at least one, but this is a place that even though it's an institution, is almost like a monster itself to me. And that's Bridgewater State Hospital. I made that a central part of my screenplay about these, which was a fictionalized version of these cases. But that's also was a place where the famous film Titicut Follies was filmed back in the late 60s. So really a horrible place to be, but also was a place, in addition to the regular mental asylum, insane asylum that was there, they sent the sex offenders there. And I think for a lot of these guys, that was like college, at least back now. Nowadays, it would be different. Nowadays, they'd be able to share techniques on the internet. But back then, now you're taking a whole bunch of these guys and they're having lunch together every day and they're just sharing techniques.
Right.
And,
right. It's almost like a PhD in how to commit crimes. And luckily, some of the people we'll talk about never saw the light of day again. And unfortunately one did. And of course, what happened, more crimes against children, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bridgewater is a central sort of, almost like a sixth man, if you will, a sixth character, in our starting lineup. And and you mentioned Titicut Follies, which of course Frederick Wiseman made the documentary. It was filmed in 1967 and didn't see the light of day until late 70s, early 80s, because a federal judge, Bridgewater sued Wiseman. A federal judge had to get involved to get the documentary out to the public. And it was really just about what was happening behind the walls of the Bridgewater Treatment Center and the home for the criminally insane, and then what would later become the home for sexually dangerous people, SDPs. And when I started my research into this, I really focused on Bridgewater. I grew up relatively close to Bridgewater. Me and my wife's first place that we lived with our children was very close to Bridgewater. I was always very able to get there. And of course, I wrote in the book about me and my dad's favorite fishing hole as a kid was located on the grounds right behind it. And it's really hard to people who don't know, but to just paint a picture, the treatment center is sort of lodged in between, what was an old juvenile boot camp that doesn't operate anymore. The Old Colony Correctional Facility, which is a facility for adult offenders who are on small sentences, mostly for drugs. They're not in county jail. They're not quite, that low of an offender level to be in county jail, where you would only serve, county jail is for offenders who are serving 2.5 years in prison or less. This was for more, guys in that 5 to 10 year range. But a lot of them had drug abuse problems, things like that. And that's where my father did the most of his time when he was locked away when I was a child for drunk driving. He got locked up for 10 years because he was a multiple drunk driving offender. He just could not stop getting behind the wheel of a vehicle while impaired and putting other people's lives in danger, including his own, of course, which I think is an absolutely repugnant crime, and you should get the book thrown at you. And my dad had picked up 6 or 7 of those charges, and finally the judge just said, you know what, you're going to go away for a while. And we're done with taking your license and slapping you on the wrist and making you pay fines. And he ended up getting like an 8-year sentence or something like that. He did pretty much all that time. But in the time that he had been there, he had seen, this pond way in the back, and me and my dad were avid fishermen. I'm still to this day an avid fisherman. It's one of my favorite activities. And I remember quite well my dad telling me when I was about 12 years old, hey, I got this place. It's in Bridgewater. It's kind of creepy, but I found it. And I think you're going to really see that the bass fishing is great here. And I don't want to go drone on and bore the audience with Bassmasters talk. But anyway, it was located way in the back of the treatment center, past the barbed wire, past the big high power tension electrical lines that run out there, into a wooded area. known as the Bridgewater Triangle, which is known for its supernatural kind of things that happen there. Everybody's been out there, from, priests to demonologists to ghost hunters. And it was a creepy place, but the fish bite, and it was a great place to fish. We'd bring sandwiches, we'd stay there all day. And then I finally realized over time, how in the hell could anybody know about this unless, of course, they locked away here? My dad didn't work there. I mean, he didn't have a clean criminal record, so there's no way he worked for the Mass DOC. He was an inmate there for a long, long time, and he'd walk the same hallways as guys like Chapman, Barjona, Doc Bauman, Richard Paluzzo, Frank Damiano, all the key members of our stories here. And when I learned that Chapman had a Bridgewater connection early on after seeing Mel's documentary, I knew that this was a calling for me, because I had always been such a just borderline, obsessed with learning everything I could about this incredible, odd place located off Route 24, and who was behind there, and my dad used to say, well, the real animals are in there,
when you were a kid, could you see the barbed wire fence from where you were fishing and we're walking there? Yeah.
Oh yeah. There was a sign right at the beginning of the dirt path that led into it, and it said, "No inmates beyond this point, shoot on sight." And it was obviously an old sign. We don't shoot inmates now for just walking out, we don't do that. But so many times I would fantasize over just ripping that sign out and hanging it on my wall, because it's such a great piece of history.
Yeah.
And it's not there anymore. Those signs are down. It's been mowed over, and there's lanes now where people play with little RC toys and things like that. It's totally not the same. But at the time it was super creepy, super interesting, and got my mind down that road of there's a lot of scary, weird things in the world.
Yeah.
And it's best for me not to be afraid of them. It's best for me to sort of delve myself into them so I can better understand them and understand myself too. And and one more story, just the quickest one. When I was doing my research for the book, for the chapter Bridgewater, my first thing was I wanted to talk to correctional officers who worked within the system at the Massachusetts Treatment Center for the Sexually Dangerous, the real worst of the worst. And I had just picked up so much great information from guys who worked every day behind those walls with those guys, and a lot of the stuff I printed, a lot of the stuff I didn't print, a lot of it was really helpful for timelines and for me to learn other people who were behind the walls with Chapman who might be able to shed some light on how he behaved and had he ever let anything slip. Among inmates talk to each other, and they talk about their crimes, and they're very open because they trust each other and they know that, hey, we're all in the same boat here. We're trying to beat the man. And, so much more to come in more episodes about Bridgewater. I feel like we have a couple Bridgewater episodes in us for sure.
Oh yeah. Dave doesn't mention the part about his father being an inmate there in his book. And he only told me that recently, and I was kind of blown away. I was like, the irony of it is just, as someone who studies film and writes screenplays, irony is essential to it. So because I remembered very poignantly in his book, the part where he's kind of talking about fishing at this secret watering hole that his dad used to bring him when he was a small boy, not knowing that later on, that would be the place that he was the central casting for the characters that he was going to be studying, and spending time looking into it. And then he finds out that there's a reason his dad was bringing it there. And I was like, that's just tremendous irony, powerful.
Yeah, very powerful and very apropos for my life. Things just sort of,
everything comes full circle.
Weird shit happens, and and you come and things do come full circle, and now of course Bridgewater is nowhere close to what it once was, just like a lot of things in our world, industry takes over and they're building condos in the back now, and it's just like a normal place. But I hope we can give our listeners who don't live in this part of the country, me and you can eloquently paint the picture of just, a moment in time with that place and that area. And hopefully we can adequately, get that out to people so they can have a really bright picture in their mind of what exactly we're talking about and why it's so important to what we're trying to accomplish here.
And we'll put up for those of you listening, you'll have to just hope that we paint it with the words well enough. But for those of you who want to see the images, you can also come to, I'll be putting good parts of these shows on Yellow Cottage Tales, and you can come on there, and I'll put on images of Bridgewater and what, some of the, and all the people that we're talking about. I did have a few questions for Dave that I wanted to make sure I get into. Not that I'm in no hurry here, but let's see. What was the first one was, oh yeah. So I'm curious. I know you got a lot of stuff going on, and you have the new book coming out. Are there any hints you can give us about, without revealing too much, but some of the new stuff that's going to be coming out, whether it's on the part of the book or on the podcast or on this series?
Well, I think the book, for those of you who read the first book here, and I think right now it's sold around, I'm looking at my dashboard, it's been gifted 114,000 times and sold 225,000 times. So we got about 400,000 copies in circulation right now. That's amazing. That blows me away, man. And I think, the main question I get all the time about the book is, can you tell me more about, I think the most prevailing question I get is, how in the world did Wayne Chapman get to Providence? Did he pick up a map, as I've suggested many, many times over the years, and just throw a dart? Or was there something more behind it? And I think now I've absolutely nailed down the fact that there was no accident in how Wayne Chapman got here. And I think in this book, I provide much more receipts and not, a lot of, hey, source told me this and source told me that. And, I'd like to clear that up. A lot of people are like, oh, you use a lot of unnamed sources, and you have to understand that the people that I'm talking to probably were in that life and don't want their names out there. Right. You know what I mean? If you know about Wayne Chapman's activities, you were either a police officer or you were somebody who was in that life, right? And you don't want to be known, know? So I had to be very careful, for people to want to talk to you in this business, you better shut up about their name and a lot of times, I wouldn't even know their name. I would have to if I heard the same story 2 or 3 times from the same people, I would print it. If it was a one-off story, I would not print it. That was basically my rule of thumb. And if I thought it was interesting and important to the context of the story, then I would do it. So I think in this book, without giving away too much, Dave comes with the receipts a lot more. That's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know just in the times that I've been talking to Dave, sometimes he will give me more of a name, but he'll say, I couldn't put it in the book because I couldn't confirm it. So, maybe you'll get more confirmation here. Another question I had was, is there something, if we're looking at smoking evidence breakthroughs, for instance, that might prove more definitively that these guys work together, or the connection to CSAM, is there something you feel that realistically we're close to getting sometime in the near future? That's something that you haven't got yet, but that is attainable.
Well, I'm always hopeful, but I'm not. I'm always hopeful, but I'm not like, I don't have like this disjointed view of reality. Like we're on an uphill battle here, we're in a real tough battle. You got people, I mean, look at the elements that we're battling here. We're battling public corruption, some people who are involved in this. And again, this is episode 1. We just want to paint a broad context and go kind of deeper as we go, and we're going to talk about all this. I mean, we're going to name names and we're going to provide receipts, but you have public corruption and people who don't want you to know that they were involved. That's one element. You have organized crime people are petrified of, even though, in today's day and age, I think we've kind of, with RICO and things like that, I think we've sort of pushed organized criminals, into the background, but you still have that element and it's instilled in us, through media and just general life knowledge, right? You got to be scared of these guys, like they'll hurt you, so you have that. Then you have crimes that were committed, in the late 1960s, 1970s. We sit here in 2023. Most of these people are dead, or they just can't remember. You know what I mean? Life has sort of taken them over. And we talked about a gentleman just a little bit ago who was a great source of information for me, who is very close to the case, who right now, I mean, he can't even get some crime straight. He's just so riddled with age and time, right? And that happens. So we're fighting that element. And any sort of the fourth element of it is the documentation of things that happened in those days is just nowhere close to what it is now. So anything that was preserved evidence-wise, documentation-wise, is just so tough to come by.
Yeah.
But I am hopeful because there's many reasons to be hopeful. There was a book written a few years back called I'll Be Gone in the Dark. It was about a killer in California who had broken into houses, raped and killed women. And it was written by a woman I can't remember her name offhand. If you just give me 2 seconds, I'll give you her name because I feel like it is important. Her name is Michelle McNamara, and she was married to a famous comedian. Unfortunately, Michelle died. She died of a fentanyl overdose. And she talked a lot in her book about how, much like my book, this took a toll on her mental health. She became obsessed. She didn't work. She didn't live. She didn't eat. She didn't shower. She was so mission oriented in finding out who this was, the Golden State Killer. She wrote this brilliant true crime book about it, and it got people's attention. It got an investigator named Kevin Hole's attention, and he used a genealogy program, and the Golden State Killer, Joseph D'Angelo, sits in prison for the rest of his life right now. And it was jump-started by this woman, Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark is the name of it. So I'm hopeful because I know the spirit of the American people when they get a hold of something is lean towards justice, right? And when people get this in their hands, they go, well, this is fucked up. I got to do something about this. Even and they go to social media and 10 other people go to social media. Now you get a snowball and all of a sudden it catches the right person and, it happens, so,
and some of the,
I'm hopeful.
So, and some of the means of using DNA is now much better because what they can do is they can look at genealogy, like I think they did in the Golden State case.
Yeah.
So, for instance, say someone like Charles Pierce, who's been dead a long time, if there was any evidence connected to one of his crimes, you could look at that now, and if he has any relatives that have submitted information to, say, Ancestry.com or something, you can connect them that way. You can say, yeah, there's a connection to a family member here. There was actually another case that was recently solved that way in Lawrence. Little girl, I was in college at the time, so I wasn't even aware of the case, but I became aware of it more recently when they arrested the guy. It was about a half mile from my house or less, where this girl her parents were inside a club drinking during the afternoon, and they used to regularly go there, and their little girl, I think, was 12. And so they'd leave her outside to play outside, and she was on her bike and she got taken by some guy, and they found her body the next day. There's a train depot there, and she had been shredded by the train, but I think the analysis showed that she was dead before the trains hit her. So someone just threw the body there, and they weren't able to solve it. And, but they more recently solved it through that genealogy. That trial might even still be ongoing.
Yeah. I know the case. I can't think of the guy's name, but it is ongoing. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So there's so many reasons to be hopeful. And also there's more out there that we don't know, you know what I mean? And there's more government agencies that have more files on Wayne Chapman that we don't have right now that would be great for us to get a hold of, it's the old thing, somebody out there knows, right? And somebody out there knows. It's just a matter of who among us can get it in front of the right person. And I was really hoping that when Chapman died a couple years back that, he'd have an attack of conscience on his deathbed. But I think he had been denying things in public for so long that he had actually convinced himself that he didn't do anything wrong,
Yeah, these deathbed confessions with these types of criminals seems to be very rare and even unreliable, because it seems like sometimes the real things they were involved in get mixed up with the fantasy life that they're absorbed in for their whole lives.
Yeah.
So it's there's so many aspects of it that just make it utterly frustrating for police and for investigators like you. And, but there's still a chance that something comes, someone confesses to something or DNA match. I think you talked the other night about an FBI file, things like it could still be. So I guess there's an FBI file that's on Chapman, but you could
He has an
get
FBI
access to
number assigned to him, which would make me believe that somebody opened up a 302 at some point on him. And well, it doesn't make me believe, makes me know. So somewhere in the government attic, there's files on Wayne Chapman, and those should be available for anybody to perform a Freedom of Information Act inquiry and get those files, and maybe get a lot of families some relief.
So anybody out there who specializes in that, please consider giving Dave some help to get those documents. I mean, to get those things, because he's got all the dots there, and it's this one missing link that might put it together. And I think if you get a little bit more solid evidence too, it really could come together in a way that maybe it starts to draw the official attention that it needs, whether from official investigators or something bigger like the Globe Spotlight team, and maybe they can hire you and put you on. I don't know how well you'd fit in with the Globe, but
as if they wouldn't burn me at the stake at the Globe.
Maybe the Herald, but I don't think the Herald has too many resources anymore.
I like working for myself. Newspapers are dead, right?
Yeah. I used to deliver the newspaper. I remember delivering some of these stories related to Andy Puglisi that went on over the years, and that was another case that when it shook the city when it happened, and for 6 days the National Guard was there, the Green Berets, it was always a helicopter
group out of Devon's was activated, the Army unit that had just returned from Vietnam that was on rest, so.
Yeah. And growing up in the city and probably everywhere, like parents, and nobody was aware of these kind of predators. And so we had the run of the city. My parents were not strict, but my parents were at home. They did care about us. They just didn't worry. So even when I was like 8 or 9 years old, we just, as long as we were home by supper, they didn't know where we went. Right. And it just wasn't any. And then when that happened, people got scared. Exactly. But then 6 days into it, the Lawrence police put out this headline story saying that we have reason to believe that Andy is with family and that nothing has happened to him. And everybody just breathed a collective sigh of relief and went on with business as usual. Again, I was out wherever I wanted to go. But what nobody knew, except maybe the cops knew and didn't really want to tell us, was that there were monsters everywhere. They were out there hunting.
And unfortunately, hell came to that city that day, and we'll be talking about it a lot more as things progress here.
Yep. Okay. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I think we covered basically everything for a good episode 1. What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, that seems pretty good. I don't know if Connor needs to say goodnight to us or anything.
Connor is hopefully saying goodnight right now to us. I'll read the story. So I apologize to everybody listening, and thank you so much for reading the book. I get emails every day. I get messages. Your interest in the story is really, what keeps me on track. I want to, this is it. I want to put the nail in this thing once and for all, and not for my own personal enjoyment, for nothing more other than, gone on for too long, too much fake news out there about what happened. And, this podcast here is for us to hopefully set the record straight and draw out any bit of knowledge that the public may have about what happened here in the 1970s. So
if you guys have any tips out there, please bring them in. Even if you're not sure about it, bring them into Dave and let him decide, because that you might have that. It might seem like a small piece of the puzzle to you, but it might be exactly what he needs to lead to something else.
Yep.
And also, just to mention too, his book is called, now this is Dave McGrath. So if you want to find this on Amazon, Dave McGrath, and the book is called Monster, the Wayne Chapman story, or the
Monster, the life and crimes of Wayne Chapman and the machine he fed. Put my email in the story, in the body of this, and I'll shoot me an email and tell me, hey Dave, I want the book, and I'll send you an autographed copy. I have about 20 of them left over from the last signing that I did upstate. So got a bunch in surplus right now. The ebook is what sells the most. Obviously, people don't buy physical copies of the book anymore for whatever reason. I like to have physical copies, but
I can highlight in the my book is full of highlights.
Yeah.
That's why I love Kindle. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Right. And I have a Kindle myself. I'm not against it, but
Yeah.
shoot me an email. And if you don't know, all I care about is that people start to know the story. They know it. They say the names, and they start to know the story. And we get some real interest in the public. That's what it's all about.
And we've set up a new Reddit page. It's got nothing on there yet, but we'll be posting these episodes on it. Come on and join us there. You can leave a tip there or talk to us there. It's called the Yellow Tape Podcast. You can also find much of these episodes on my YouTube channel, which is Yellow Cottage Tales. And I will link to Dave's book there. I'll also link to Melanie's documentary, Have You Seen Andy? Link to the Reddit page, and you can contact us there. The more eyes we get on these things and the bigger it gets, that gives us the best chance to getting these kind of breakthroughs that Dave has spent 7 years going into some very unsavory places and getting in trouble with his wife.
Yeah, I'm way too too open and honest with the audience. But hey, the things you do for art,
Yeah. That's one of the things you'll see with Dave is that he's very honest, and I think that's I learned pretty quickly on that, or I sensed that his superpower when he goes into these places to talk to people that haven't even thought about these crimes for a long time, most of them are going to dummy up. I lived in Charlestown and Lawrence, these Northeast neighborhoods, people dummy up. Any outsider comes in, and certainly anybody that's a cop. But somehow I think Dave gets these people talking to him in a way that official detectives wouldn't. So that's kind of his superpower. So stay with us here and you're going to learn a lot more.
Stay with us. We'll talk to you guys in a couple days.
Okay. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Kev.